Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. Today's episode focuses on success and what that means to each individual. Our guest is a founding member of the genre-bending trio Time for Three, the founder of the East Coast Chamber Orchestra, and a fellow alumni of the Curtis Institute of Music. He is considered one of our generation's most persuasive champions of bringing new audiences to concert halls, and his work is based on the simple idea that the energy you exude greatly impacts the relationship that you build. Please join me in welcoming my longtime friend and colleague, violinist Nick Kendall. Nick, welcome to the show.
What's up, Pallavi? It's so great to be here. This is so cool.
It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for asking me. It's a real privilege to be part of this amazing project you're doing. Really, really awesome.
Thank you. I really love that sentence from your bio, that your work is based on the simple idea that the energy you exude greatly impacts the relationship that you build. Because I have known you for so many years, and I have to say that you have one of the greatest energies of anyone I've ever met. You transmit so much joy and positivity through your personality on and off stage, and you have this incredible ability to make everyone around you feel seen and heard. So thank you for being here today with us to share your energy.
Man, well, it's all fake. It's just all fake. I'm glad I got you, No, but thank you, Pallavi. I appreciate that.
Of course. No, I wanted to pick your brain for today's topic because I feel that you are just such a great example of success. You carved out a path for yourself that was true to your passion, veering away from the traditional paths of classical music long before sort of, breaking the rules was acceptable. And I feel that you really paved the way for many in our generation to explore their creativity beyond sort of the standard that is expected for classical musicians. So I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about your musical origins and what drew you to explore and pursue a non-traditional classical music path.
Well, it's interesting because, in my career, as you know, Pallavi, I have this chance now to speak. I do a lot of education concerts, so I'm speaking to a lot of young kids. And also, I guess, since we're speaking at this level, I am speaking to, soon to be graduates of music conservatories, but even outside of music, people still in school. And I have to say that when I look back, and if I had the chance to tell myself, I would tell myself to do things a lot differently. So it's kind of ironic. Yeah, because I feel so I've gotten to this point in my life probably by a lot of luck and like a lot of accidents just went right. But there is something at the center of everything that has stayed true. And it is why I included that thing in my bio, that I have always thrived and loved music as a way to communicate and as a way to build relationships and to have these experiences that are so visceral and, for me, super intense. And that, it always, whenever I enter a certain situation and then on the other side, I go through something. And it's a reward. It's the thing that as a human being you cannot describe, but you are definitely aware of it. So all throughout my journey of just whatever I did, that was always at the center of it. And probably other factors contributing towards why I was able to be successful with that kind of road that I sort of paved stemmed back from my childhood. I think I come from a wonderful family. Music was a central aspect to our education, but to be clear, it was not meant to produce professional musicians. It was, it's one of these things where I feel like I'm going to do this for my child, maybe, but it's, music shapes us. It makes us, it allows us to have a more well-rounded education, and it's not at the expense of the other activities. It's only an application to enhance kind of like everything. And so for me, it created routine and structure, which I really needed in my life, because I was one of these kids with a lot of energy, and my poor mom always had to like keep me on a harness, because if she let go when I was like 4 or 5, I would have just darted off into some direction and be lost in the crowd, which apparently happened in Japan at a train station. She had to like release me to check something in her bag. She looked down and I was nowhere to be found. My
Oh
poor
my
mom.
gosh.
Can you imagine? But music, my relationship to the activity of learning and practicing and playing only allowed me to have some centrifugal force to all this energy that was all about outward, like wanting to connect. So I needed something to really build the gearbox for myself. And that's really what that was about. And then I think, later on, my family, my parents, when I say my family, it's because my sister and I we feel very lucky to come from a very musical family, but we kind of all look up to my grandfather, who was one of the first pioneers of the Suzuki method from Japan to the United States in the 60s. So he was like a big deal, whatever. And as a young kid, i I related to him big time, because I before I started playing violin, I would see him in a sea of children with violins, group class, and he would have them laughing but also playing exactly together. And those sort of that blend of having so much fun but also really playing well to have fun was, I think, another kernel of inspiration for me. And so I think when I say my family kind of saw that I had more than just practicing and music as an application to learning, that maybe there's something more than that to me. I think my parents could lean into that perspective. And so then I sort of headed on this path of, well, maybe violin should be a little bit more than just this side activity. Um, and yeah, so I had great teachers. I went to a wonderful school that was really diverse and very much for the arts, called the Waldorf School. And I also had, I think, during that time, really positive musical experiences in choir. We had kind of like a small semblance of a string orchestra, but also just a real small student body. The aspect well, I not Curtis, but of Waldorf, is that the classes are really small. So I was able to, I mean, the biggest class I had was 13 kids. I was one of 13.
Wow.
Is super small. And the idea behind Waldorf education, much like Suzuki method, is that there's a real, every child, the idea that every child has their own path and has their own way of learning, speed of learning, that, and the teacher, the main teacher, has a relationship with each child in the class from first grade all the way until eighth grade. And then, of course, in high school, it's very small too, and it's kind of the same idea, but it's a little bit different. But that kind of building for me, and that relationship and nurturing, was at the center of my life. Which I think, when I think about how I'm successful now, is because I kind of had those roots. Um, this self awareness, I think, this ability, now that I'm in my older years, when the challenges are so great, and or when I have panic attacks, or the road seems so unbearably difficult, that at the end of the day, I think I have this thing in my mind that says, but it's all going to work out somehow. And we can unpack that a little bit more. It's not just as simple as that. Um,
But I love that. Yeah.
it's been a useful tool for me. Um, I will talk. I will. I was thinking about one story I wanted to share. That kind of was a big moment for me when I was young. That really lit the fire of why I love this energy with people while I'm playing. That I felt like needed to be there at every moment of my musical experiences, and if it wasn't there, I'd hit the eject button and get out of it. Um, and so I talk about I was at Waldorf School. We had this amazing choir teacher, Mr. Gibson, and Mr. Gibson was the gospel choir and band leader and music director at his church in, I think it was in Southeast Washington D.C., where I was growing up. And actually, you and I have a connection. We both grew up in the D.C. metropolitan area, but um, and so he was my school's choir director, and of course, I played violin solo with him at school, and he would accompany me and everything. But he asked me and my parents, would I be willing to go play a Sunday service at his church? And I was like, oh yes, totally not knowing what it meant and where in the city I was going. I was just like, oh yeah, another performance with Mr. Gibson? Absolutely. I love Mr. Gibson. Um, and so, sure enough, my parents took me, and I remember vividly going to that area of the city, which was, and I actually haven't been to that exact area, but was really kind of a really run down part of the city. And I remember driving down and approaching the church and seeing literally like broken down cars, empty buildings, but noticing people dressed to the nines with and it was winter, so and little children dressed beautifully, everybody going into the church. And so I came in, and Mr. Gibson waved me in. The church was packed full of people. I remember very distinctly that it was very cold outside, but going inside was very hot. So everybody took off their stuff, and the service began, and Mr. Gibson called me up to the front. So I kind of sat with my violin right at the first pew, and I was witness to this incredible thing that happened. So the whole gospel choir was up in front on the stage. There was a band, drums, keyboards. I mean, I don't remember. I just know that there was a band. There was a B3 organ, I'm sure. And then there was this preacher who was quite elderly, and he came up there and he just spoke, and I don't remember what he spoke about, but what I do remember is that he would speak about something, and he would make a proclamation, and suddenly the audience would go amen, just like this. And he said, and can I get an amen? Amen. Can I get an amen? Amen. Boom, chicka, boom, boom. And then like the choir starts singing. And I was just like, what the heck is going on? And then they bring down the energy, and then he starts speaking about, obviously now in my older age, he's preaching. He's talking about the subject of the day. And the congregation was totally engaged with the music. And then they would go into, and then like 6-7 part harmony singing with something. I mean, it was so incredible. And then it was time for Mr. Gibson to come up and say, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest. And this is a young violinist who's going to play for us something by the Spanish composer Sarasate called Zigeunerweisen. Amen. So I get up there and I'm like, wow. So of course, I'm very different than anybody. I look different than anybody there, but there's so much love. And they got really quiet, and I get up there. I had a white buttoned up shirt and black pants, and looked so much like a fish out of water. And I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but Mr. Gibson on the upright piano, don dee bum, like a bar piano. It sounded great. I love it. Da dum da dum, and I go da dee dum da dee play da 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 dum da bum. This huge eruption. Amen. Boom. Just like just like, and I'm like, whoa, what happened? So then I go, the next passage is da da ya da 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 ya da 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 dum da dum jump jump. there was this for the rest of the opening cadenza, this rhapsodic beginning to Zagornweisen was a visceral conversation and energy exchange between these humans who were there to gather for the spirit of uplifting and positivity. And I was honored to be at the very center of that energy and lean way into it with everything that I knew how to do, which was my heart and my love for Zagornweisen. And of course, at the end was just a freaking party. So I'm saying this to you because there's so much of that exchange, that conversation, that realness that has been a like this really strong pillar in me. And as I said, that was a guiding mechanism as I kind of navigated going to Curtis Institute of Music, um, which of course is in Philadelphia, which has an incredible music scene besides the extraordinary talent that I loved at Curtis and the experiences I had at Curtis, but outside the city or outside in the city. Um, the moment when I had to figure out what I'm going to do as a professional, and we can get into all this. But I wanted to share that story because it's very raw, it's very basic, but it was foundational to who I am to this day.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know that story, and we've known each other for many years, and I know a lot about you, but it's so incredible the way you speak about this, and I'm just like visualizing you as, I don't know how old you were at that time.
I think it was like 12 or
12?
13 or something.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like visualizing you, knowing you now, like it must have been so adorable to watch.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And
And
my mom is short Japanese, mom just there accompanying me. And I wanted to ask her what she witnessed. That would be fun to do. Actually, I haven't talked about it.
wow. No, I love that. And I guess it's safe to say that, I mean, I would love for you to talk about this, but I'm guessing that that was that was one of the experiences, the really formative experiences that sort of led you um, to form Time for Three, your band.
Well, yes, the energy of just letting go and riding the wave of energy, which isn't, it isn't only just fast music or, something with a backbeat and just crazy. It's emotional, right? Riding that wave of emotion and feel like you're communicating one person, a room full of 10 people, 1,000 people, but leaning into your craft. So basically everything becomes perspective because you have experiences like that. And then it's just like, oh, well, if I prepare, if I practice, the more I practice and the more I get to know this, and then, years later, the score or the music, the more freedom I'm going to have. So the aspect of freedom comes from discipline has been kind of like a big mantra for me in life. And, uh, and so, yes, I would definitely say that with Time for Three, I was playing with two other super facile musicians. Like technique wasn't really the thing. Technique was serving the music, it's serving our expression, and it was just emotions. And I think that chemistry. Obviously, the three of us had we had a friendship, so it became fun and games and extremely dynamic um, and yeah, it was definitely at the center of the aha moment with Time for Three. When Time for Three started, we got hired we played the annual famous Christmas party at Curtis, which happens traditionally all throughout the ages of Curtis. And we sort of had this idea of going up and just jamming together, the three of us. Renan and Zach Depew, who was the founding member of Time for Three. And we had jam sessions prior to that in Curtis Hall, when it was known as Curtis Hall. And after orchestra rehearsals, we dim the lights and just have jam sessions, like whatever. And a lot of times we would take thematic material that we had just played, so maybe we're working on a Schumann symphony or whatever. And we either the chord progression, the melody, of course, but then maybe the chord progressions, we'd sort of repeat, cycle through some beautiful whatever, and then do a new melody over it or whatever. We just mess around. Um, but so this idea of doing something Christmas party happened. We did that. Of course, at Curtis, we were very lucky. There are many people in the community that have position to hire you out. So there was one gentleman who hired us out for a gig, and we literally spent, I don't know, 15 minutes just touching up the 20-minute program that we needed to do. And it was a blast, and it was so rewarding. And afterwards we said, well, if we put a little bit more time than just 20 minutes, maybe this could be something. And that's how it started.
Wow. I really love that. I want to backtrack because you bring up a really interesting point about your experience at that church and playing Zurgenweisen and having an audience be cheering at the end of the first phrase,
Yes.
which, as we know in classical music and in classical music performances, pin drop silence is expected, unlike in jazz performances or pop, rock and roll, whatever it is, and basically in every other musical genre, the more noise you make, the better, right? And it's a really interesting difference between classical music and other musical genres. However, I have never felt personally that there is a lack of connection with classical music. And I would love to talk about this because I think it's really, really interesting. I completely understand your point, and I can only imagine your experience in having that, because I feel like that would probably eliminate every single ounce of nerves. To have people cheering you on, like, yes, go for it. Whereas in classical music concerts, of course, we feel like everyone's judging us until the last second, right?
Exactly.
but but at the same time, the whole purpose of music in any genre is to communicate something.
And I would exactly, Pallavi. And I also would say to engage with it. The engagement factor is and when humans engage, it's because it's on their terms. They want to be there and they want to
Mm.
engage. I think this narrative of like, I wish, like the experience I told about being in this church, to then just carbon copy that and put it into like, a performance of a Beethoven sonata is not correct,
Hmm.
because it's a different kind of engagement. It's the same engagement, it's the same human factors that going into it, but it's this different kind of language, it's a different kind of experience. And that's okay. I think it's extremely disruptive. Now in my older age, I actually love when it's very rare for me to hear an orchestral performance that I'm really engaged with in the first place. But when I do hear it, and I'm just being real, but when I do hear it, I do want to feel the connection between the first and second movement. Obviously, or I should say, I want to hear the silence between the second and third
Yeah,
movement. That's what I
yeah.
meant. Because usually the first movement ends big, and I want to just be like, yeah. It's not like I'm gonna go woo like that. That's disruptive. That that's just that's unrealistic, and that's just putting the attention on me, and rather than the music and the experience we're all sharing as an audience. Um but yeah, I don't think I don't I think it's about being super real with the music, and there are different expressions and different languages and genres that if you're engaged with it, one should feel open to react naturally.
Mm.
And I do feel that the best performances, and when I say best, I'm not talking about technically best or the most extraordinary interpretation that, oh my God, all that BS. I'm talking about ones that really are saying something. You feel the music. Those are the ones that I think naturally are going to result in human interaction, whatever that's going to be. And it's going to be real, and it's going to be natural and unforced and invited. And I think in the classical music world, we have to really kind of always pay attention to that and take care that we're not trying to be disruptive to the extent that it's just all about disruption, but it's a careful balance that we always need to tend to, I think.
I love that. I really love that. And I think you're absolutely right that it's not just this big generalization of, okay, now we should start cheering in every classical music concert. No, that's not what we're saying. But the way we learn to interact, being a classical musician can be very lonely and isolating. And particularly for pianists, for example, where we do spend a lot of time alone, in our practice room and traveling alone, performing alone, it can be very isolating. And I look forward so much to that intangible connection with the audience when I go to perform. And one of the
Yeah,
things that I really love to do is to speak a little bit about my program
yeah,
before I play. Not a music lecture, but really just to say a few words about what this program means to me, what I think is interesting about it, some cool fact that the audience may not know, and it just gives the audience a way to connect with me also on a human level,
absolutely.
and it gives me a chance to actually look into their eyes because also as a pianist, I'm not facing
Yeah,
the audience. So most of the time, the only chance I get to see them is when I'm bowing for those 3 seconds. So it's really a nice way to connect. And I remember when I used to play violin, it was a
that's
very
right. I forgot.
yeah. Well, actually, I should say that my musical origins are linked to you more than I remember, like more than I realized to remember, because I started with Suzuki. And that is
Oh,
thanks to your
wow.
grandfather because he brought it to the country.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow.
And then I actually had chamber music lessons with your grandfather when I was a teenager.
I did not know that when in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think I must have been 12 or 13.
No
And he
kidding.
coached my group and I on Schubert Trout Quintet.
Oh, you know what? Wait, but you were playing piano by then.
No, I was playing piano.
I no, I do remember that you had played for my grandfather, but on piano. I do remember that.
Yeah, that
That's
was really incredible. And that was sort of my first introduction to the Kendall siblings.
Oh boy.
um, no, but what I wanted to say was that when I played violin, it was in a Suzuki group and it was very interactive. And I also played in
Yes.
orchestras and I played a lot of chamber
Yes.
music. So for
Yes.
me, violin was always a social thing, you know, whereas piano was always a soloist thing.
Yeah, no,
So
that's
yeah,
I feel you on that, and that's super deep. I have to say that that was a contributing factor for me as a young person as well. That um, I would look forward to group classes, Suzuki group classes every weekend, um, and that is a memory I have when I was really young. And um, it's like you're doing an activity that is with you're doing something that everybody else is doing too, and it's very kind of like um, on your terms. And I don't know. I loved it. It was, and I also a great thing for me. Again, just me as the way as how I was wired. I always wanted to do the cool pieces, the more advanced pieces, or like for Witches Dance, which is in the Suzuki repertoire
yeah,
early
I
stages.
remember.
I wasn't allowed to do the dance until I could play in tune, play all the right notes, because Nicholas loved to play other notes than was written uh, on the page. And um, so if I could do that, then I was allowed to do the dance. And man, that was just such a carrot for me. So I worked really hard because man, when I got to do the dance, I would do it so many times, and I do it with everybody else, the older kids, and I just thought it was like so cool. Dum da dum ba dum. and I'd look back and kick out front. Dun dun dun, but look over here, kick it. And you know what I was doing? I was using all of the mechanisms that go into interpretation, go into improvisation, harnessing harnessing my um, intuition, but also what is the word I'm trying to find? But it's all of those ingredients were already starting to form um, who I am today, and everything that goes into interpretation to a classical piece. But obviously, when I'm writing or in a jam session or whatever, so freedom comes from discipline. It's the same thing.
But it was basically, it sounds like it was your self creativity already starting to show
Yeah.
itself from a very young age. And that brings up a really good point because what you do in your career, in your
Yes.
non traditional path, is still music and performance.
Absolutely.
But, as we know, classical music is very traditional and structured, and it can often have a sort of elitist perception and expectation around it. And I'm
Expectation.
curious, yeah, expectation. And I'm curious to know, have you ever experienced any discouragement in your journey for following a different path? And how did you deal with that?
Well, the answer is yes, but it came from the most important, one of the most important people in my life, which is my mom. Even today, she'll be like, "Oh," my dad will be like, "Son, get a big warm hug," and my mom would be like, "Oh, very good." I'm like, "What, mom?" She's like, "No, very good. I just did you practice enough?" I'm like, "Ugh, just she still can get me." But in my early age, in my even through high school, she would really discourage any other activity than practicing whatever my teachers were telling me to work on. And I know she did that because she recognized that all of this other stuff came so naturally to me that what I needed to work on, and this is what we all need to do, is work on the things that do not come naturally to you, and that isn't always clear, and that's why parenting is such a career and wonderful thing in itself, but can also be a huge challenge because you always have to balance. And for me, I'm so grateful to my parents and my teachers for putting up with my crap, really, because I fought them tooth and nail. I wanted to do all the fun stuff that was spontaneous and came easy to me, not my sister was very different, and this is just me we're talking about, and they had to pull me way back to create that. They had to find the fulcrum point because, man, I was swinging hard on just one side.
Weren't you
And
playing on trash cans when
yeah,
you
I
were
was,
like
yeah,
a
exactly.
kid?
I had a bucket band. That came because my mom, as you know, my mom is from Japan, and at an early age, um, I I would go to Japan quite often. I actually went to kindergarten there, but during the summer times, they have these cultural festivals that are very special, even in the little villages. And my grandparents lived in a small village, and they would have it's very traditional where they would have this band of musicians and actors and actresses kind of going through the streets, and they would stop and then kind of recite or play out an ancient samurai or shogun or any just some story. But then there would be these huge taiko drums, these traditional loud drums. Taiko, it's called demon drummers. They are to
Wow.
so loud, they are meant to drive away the demons. And my mom said I was very attracted to that sound. I'd actually want to come closer to that sound. So that visceral energy was something that always stayed with me, and I ended up wanting to have my own drum set. My parents said absolutely none of that in my house, in our house. But they did allow me, so I said, okay, fine. You be that way. I'll check out what I'm going to do. So I took my dad. My dad he's a architect, but he also built things. So he had a wonderful workshop in our house. Paint buckets, like metal objects, and sawhorses, which are these things that builders put out to actually build upon. And I created my own drum set out of trash cans and paint buckets.
That's
And so
incredible.
so I think my parents said, okay, well, he's being creative, and will allow it. Um, and I, of course, growing up outside of DC, where the urban scene is just beautiful and plentiful, um, I was very caught up in that music, and invited my classmates, and we would go sneak out to Georgetown when I was in high school. We'd sneak out to Georgetown and play for money on the weekends. It was great, and
Wow.
that was a very good antithesis to the structure of when I was learning like Lalo or Brahms. You know, it was it
Wow.
was going out there and playing music, and the audience would just surround you, and that visceral, that was another ingredient that
Wow.
that played into what I am.
Wow. It kind of your story about how sort of your mother was the one to sort of try to pull the reins a little bit in terms of just making sure that you were also learning discipline and hard work and those kind of things. It it makes me think a little bit about societal expectations and
Yes,
societal pressure, whether it's self-imposed or it's cultural, parental, societal. And for example, I think often a lot about the kind of societal boxes that we're put into, even in non-musical terms, like in the academic world, for example. The societally accepted and expected route for many is like, school, college, maybe grad school, do an internship, get a job, get married, buy a house, a car, have 2.5 kids and a white picket fence and maybe a dog. you know and and in the music world, it's there are kind of like two narrow expected paths. Either you study and practice, you go to conservatory, get your master's, doctorate, and you teach at some big school, or you study, practice, compete in big competitions, and you travel around the world performing concerts. And that's a lot of pressure for, I think, many classical musicians in the world, because it makes us feel as though there isn't really room for all of us. And I kind of, it makes me wonder if maybe that's why many classical musicians more and more are choosing to explore kind of less traditional paths with music, whether it's crossover or music education, community related projects, or even music adjacent projects. I mean, case in point with this podcast.
which is
um,
awesome.
so I was just wondering, like, what do you think it is that we are seeking beyond the boxes and the boundaries of traditional classical music settings?
Well, it's a really good question, and I mean, hey, I think everything you're saying is right. And one of the difficulties about a career in this genre of classical music is there's this expectation to be really good at a lot of different things, and there's a weight to that I think is un it's unrealistic and unhealthy. Um, because we're supposed to like have your own interpretation of Bach, to then Stravinsky, to then playing Tchaikovsky, and rather than really what other avenues of success in the entertainment world are squarely focused on what comes naturally to that performer or to that artist. And I think in classical music, there's this. I I'm more of a fan of saying, well, don't try to be an expert at everything. Find your lane. Find what you love.
Hmm.
And because I think the reason why I think there's such a cascade of classically trained artists wanting to do the other is because there has been an acceptance of artists who want to do the things that they want to do, play the music that they want to play, which can be like crazy experimental plug-in synthesizers and all this, but then do a beautiful thing of Palestrina in the middle of the program, and then weave
Mm.
out and do this, and I mean it's everything that's turning them on, which of course is going to translate, because if you are at the level of technique and wisdom, because if you have made it through any of the big conservatories of the world, you're already at a really high point. There's just this one block. There's this one thing that is just not allowing you to just let your X factor go, get out into the world, and it's all psychological. And I think that if one artist wants to just be a Schubert specialist, that's okay. Or if somebody wants to, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's what I've done.
Mm.
I've very, very purposely said no to a lot of stuff. And when I said at the beginning that stuff was by accident, or maybe I would do things differently, but I just stupidly, without understanding the consequences, I would just say no.
Mm.
And because I wasn't feeling it. And that was it. That
No.
was really basic like that.
But that
And it's also
itself takes a lot of courage.
it does, but it's also kind of stupid, like, because you're not thinking. But
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like I didn't know how to say no
yeah,
to
uh-huh.
things when I was
And
younger.
especially in classical music, and traditionally there's such, there's this hierarchy of expectation, like you're talking about, which is such, it's nonsense. And there's nothing worse than a correct version of something, whatever that is,
Mm.
or like going to something and somebody's trying so hard to be something that they're just not. I mean,
Mm.
it's frustrating. I actually get really pissed off when I see that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of right in what you're saying, and there's also a lot of right in feeling like one doesn't belong, the feeling of not
Mm.
belonging. That is all really important to lean into.
Mm.
The answer to that isn't instantaneous. It's it's a it's it's um it's a constant exploration and a constant trial and error that you arrive at. And that's when, just the kind of human factors of being able to get through challenging moments, understanding that, you know, it is only just a challenge, and it is momentary in meaning that it has a beginning and then it will end.
Mhm.
That no matter what, you will be stronger and get closer to the answer on the other side of it. Um, and the more you just push through and understand that it's going to be okay, um, the more you actually are going to succeed in finding whatever that is you want to do. Now, this is all super. I don't know if this is all vague what I'm saying, but I do think that it's part of finding that success.
I really love that. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I know for myself, I when I was growing up, I had this idea that if I didn't have, one or 200 concerts a year by the time I was a certain age, that I was going to be unsuccessful as a
Yeah.
musician. And my idea of success today has changed so drastically, over the last 20, 10, and even 5 years, even 1 year. And for me today, success does not have one definition, neither in
Yes.
music nor in life. There's a quote by Zig Ziglar that I really like
Mm.
that says, "Success is a personal standard, reaching for the highest that is in us, becoming
Yes.
all that we can be." And I really, really love that because for me, success is simply feeling content and at peace with what I choose to spend my time doing. And
Yes.
whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm choosing to do, as long as I'm acting with integrity and from my values, I feel at peace,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
mean, and I think that's beautiful. And it should be noted that what's implied in that it's never done. Like, that journey is never finished. And I mean, right now, I still, mm, success is what I want. Success for me now is finding the thing that's honest with me, but also to be realistic and to be able to
Mm.
provide. If I'm going to leave home, I have a new child, and
Mhm.
if I'm going to leave home and away from my wife and my family, there needs to be a real reason. It can't just be the reasons that were the case before our child arrived in this world. And so
Right.
there's a different now set of circumstances that I have to balance. But balancing and always thinking and engaging with that conundrum is something that I'm always like I'm bootstrapped and ready to always have that journey in my life, because it's going to always, it's always going to have struggle, but there's also going to be a lot of wins in there, and you have to be aware of that.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. It is a beautiful, never ending journey. And it's definitely been a journey for me, even to reach this point of, what success means to me in this moment.
Yeah.
And I have really a long, long way to go. But being able to remove this sort of metaphorical straitjacket that I was unknowingly wearing my whole life has been a massive game changer. I mean,
Yeah.
shout out to my therapist. Thank you for your wisdom and guidance. But it's really been incredible. And I appreciate so much you taking the time to chat with us today about this, because
Absolutely.
you have such a great story. And I hope that, anyone listening out there who may feel conflicted about their path or the choices that they're making, are these choices coming from what they feel they have to do or what they truly want to do? And how can they use those choices to fulfill their purpose, So I hope anyone listening out there, hearing Nick's journey, will be a source of inspiration. I really do feel that if we are willing to find a way to tap into our creativity that breaks those societal constructs and barriers,
Hmm.
we will find that the world really is big enough for all of us to flourish and thrive.
Oh my God. Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for sharing your life story and your wisdom,
Absolutely.
and
This
of
is
course your
so cool.
energy.
Well, this is I think our our business, but also our world is going to be so much healthier because of you doing this project. It's a
You're so sweet.
much needed thing, especially coming out of these dark times that we everybody is facing, coming out of coronavirus, and how disruptive that has been. This is really, really great. So congratulations. This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Nick. Of course. Thank you for taking the time. It's always so nice
Absolutely.
to talk to you. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page at Conscious Artist Podcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength, and we will see you next time for another episode of The Conscious Artist.